Hello, I'm Claire Jewitt, and this is the Diary of an Orange Cat. The diary entries of a thoughtful, slightly neurotic ginger cat living in a small harbour community in New Zealand. Last time, Weasley had a rather opinionated visitor. While the encounter raised a few uncomfortable questions, it also left Weasley with plenty to think about. This week, as life settles back into its usual rhythm, an unexpected development brings admiration, romance, and a sudden and rather alarming turn of events. This is Scarface. I would just like to say that there is absolutely nothing at all wrong with being admired. In fact, it's something one should accept with a certain level of grace, provided, of course, that one is looking one's best. Thursday, 26th December 2019. I've just seen the Christmas present that Mummy got from her daughter. It's a framed portrait of me painted by a local artist. I didn't get to see it until today because we've had that blasted dog staying with us over Christmas. But now that I've seen this, I'm not feeling remotely anxious about him anymore. I bet he's not featured among the family portraits hanging in the hall at his home. Ha! Friday, 31st of January, 2020. Naturally, with Diamond Harbour being such a small place, word got out, and in the weeks following Christmas, a steady stream of neighbourhood cats have come over for a viewing. Probably all hopeful that their owners might want to follow suit and get their portrait done. Alarmingly, even a couple of dogs turned up, although I didn't let them into the house, of course. It was at one of these viewings that I first laid eyes on Megan. I could tell at once that she was a class act and something of an art scholar. It was the way that she stood back from the portrait and cocked her head to the side, as if appraising the work deeply and thoughtfully. "You know, Weasley, you don't mind me calling you Weasley, do you?" I nodded dumbly, and she continued in the rich, throaty voice. "The most enriching and fascinating artwork requires an investment of time to fully appreciate. The artist has really captured your pensive mood, arousing my curiosity and making me want to get to know you better. I love gingers as much as I love art. Both can be forceful and dramatic or subtle and contemplative. Which do you prefer, abstract impressionism or photorealism?" I attempted to adopt my most contemplative look, as if giving this serious consideration. "Photorealism, I think." "I knew you'd say that." She laughed as though we'd struck some huge cosmic bond. I led her on a stroll around the garden, pointing out my favourite spots and sharing stories of Ron, Squeak and Seraphina. I was amazed the way Megan looked at me with rapt attention, eager to hear more. Time flew by in her presence, and before I knew it, the sun began to dip below the horizon. "I'm going to have to go home now from my dinner," she said, and I was pleased to hear a note of disappointment in her voice. "Come over again," I cried. "We can—" I only just stopped myself from saying, "Look at my picture again," and I struggled to end the sentence. I thought about inviting her to our mindfulness meeting on Wednesday evening, but I wasn't sure if Megan would enjoy sitting under the deck watching the others stuff their faces with stolen food while listening to Seraphina bang on about her latest social action campaign. Thankfully, Megan finished it for me. "I'll come by soon so that we can get to know each other." She gave me a sultry smile and dropped her photograph at my feet before she turned and walked slowly away, deliberately flicking her tail from side to side as she went. I stood mesmerised, and suddenly the urge to eat deserted me, and all I could do for the rest of the evening was stare at her photograph and dream about the wonderful afternoon we had spent together. Monday, 3rd of February, 2020. Ron came round this morning and polished off the bowl of steak and kidney cat food that I'd scarcely touched. He licked his lips and said, "Nice bit of steak and kidney. What's wrong? Aren't you eating?" "I don't feel like food at the moment," I said dreamily, and gazed at the photograph of Megan that I'd propped up against a flower pot. Ron gave a low whistle. "Who's the hottie?" he said, and glanced at the back of the photo, which showed her name written neatly in capital letters. "Megan, eh? Wow!" It's not Megan, I corrected. It's Megan. She came over yesterday to look at my portrait and we got chatting. We talked about art. Yeah, right, scoffed Ron. Where does she live? I haven't seen her around before. I don't know. I'd only just realised that I didn't know this. What if she never came round again? She'd be lost to me forever. We've got to find her, I said urgently. Calm down, Valentino. You might want to get rid of that dirty great pimple you've got on your face before we set up a search party to find Megan, said Ron, sounding out the syllables of her name clearly. What dirty great pimple? Ron led me inside and pushed my face into the shiny metal food bowl that he'd recently licked clean. My God, it was hideous. I certainly hadn't felt or noticed it before. Had it been there yesterday when I was happily chatting with Megan and she was being too polite to say anything? Was it shining out like a beacon on the portrait that I'd been proudly showing off to half the community? I hurriedly went to check the picture in the hall and was relieved to find that there was no unsightly lump showing on my face. That was a relief, at least. Megan came round later in the evening. My heart leapt when I spotted her out of the window, but sensing she wouldn't want to be seen with a freak, I hid under Mummy's bed until she'd gone. After a while, Mummy came to find me. She was worried because I hadn't been eating anything and wondered why I was hiding under the bed. Then she caught sight of the thing on my face, and I found myself in the middle of my own personal nightmare. Tuesday, 4th of February, 2020. Mummy shoved me into a cage this morning and informed me that we're going to a place called Little River. As we neared the car, I caught a glimpse of Ron in the driveway. I wondered if he had overheard our conversation and hoped that he would spread the news to my feline friends. We drove for what seemed like an eternity, and all the while I couldn't shake the fear that someone would put me in a sack and toss me into a little river. Perhaps that's why Mummy had wanted the portrait of me as a last memento. It pained me to think that I may never see my darling Megan or play with Ron, Squeak and Seraphina, never snuggled up to Mummy in her dressing gown. When the car engine turned off, I could feel a lump forming in my throat. The moment I was inside the building, I knew exactly where I was. I was at the vet. I knew this because I'd come here as a kitten to be neutered. The vet looked at my face, then talked to Mummy about something that sounded like a papilloma. Isn't that the place where all those bulls run amok in the streets? Then Mummy left with no tearful, heart-rending goodbyes, and I was given an injection which made me feel extremely sleepy. Thoughts of Megan swirled around my head as I faced the reality that I was undoubtedly being euthanized, just like Whittaker had been. When I awoke, I was back in my cage, and Mummy was smiling at me through the bars. I gave her my filthiest look, but although I was still woozy and my face felt swollen and bruised, I had a feeling that everything was going to be all right. I slept most of the way home, my mind too addled to comprehend what might have happened at the vet. We arrived home, and Mummy tried to put this ridiculous plastic cone around my neck. I wasn't having a bar of it, and I managed to rip the thing off in short order. Thankfully she didn't try and do that again. Tuesday, 11th of February, 2020. I've had to stay inside for an entire week. The good side to this is that Mummy keeps bringing home the most delicious food. All of my favourites have been on offer. On the downside, I'm getting so bored that I can't help doing naughty things like jumping on the kitchen bench. I meow continuously at the doors and windows and try to sneak outside every time Mummy steps out of the door. It's been a long week, particularly since I haven't been able to see any of my friends. I could have sworn I caught a glimpse of Megan's lovely face in the foliage this morning, but when I turned my head to show her my scar and stitches, she ran away with the ginger Tom. Ron had once mentioned that a good scar can be a real chick magnet, and I briefly considered changing my name from Weasley to Scarface. Maybe Megan wasn't much into scars, or perhaps my sighting of her was just a figment of my imagination. Left alone, I resorted to playing with a toy mouse and a ping-pong ball. Wednesday, 19th of February, 2020. My wound is finally healed, and there's now no trace of the growth. I was granted permission to venture outside over the weekend, which is fortunate because I was dying to share my experiences at the mindfulness meeting this evening. Secretly, I was hoping to catch sight of Megan before the meeting, but she was nowhere to be found. I was also extremely surprised and disappointed when Seraphina didn't show up to tonight's meeting. "Where's Seraphina?" I asked Ron and Squeak after they'd marvelled at my face, which now was completely back to normal. They'd both stopped by the day after I'd got back from the vet and had seen the horrific gash on my face through the window. She's resting at home," said Squeak. "She's been beside herself with worry and got very, overwrought." "As overwrought as a newt," giggled Ron. "We must go and see her," I said. "Put her mind at rest." "I don't think that's a good idea," protested Squeak, but I was already striding off towards Seraphina's house with Ron and Squeak hard on my heels. The moment I saw Seraphina, I knew why Squeak had warned me against it. My poor little sister was sound asleep in a cardboard box amid a load of empty gin bottles. "Someone told her you had a malignant tumour," said Squeak. All I wanted to do was give my little sister a big brotherly hug and tell her I was okay. "She's going to feel like crap in the morning," said Ron. We went back to my house. I had a feeling the boys wanted to tell me something, and when Squeak started squeaking, I could tell that something was really wrong. "It's about Megan," began Squeak uncomfortably. "What about Megan?" I asked anxiously. "She's not ill, is she? She hasn't been out on the terps with Seraphina?" Well, we think it might have been Megan who was responsible for Seraphina's condition," said Squeak. "When we told Seraphina about Megan, she did a bit of detective work and she discovered that Megan is actually on heat." "On heat?" I exclaimed, horrified. "Are you sure? I didn't think female cats on heat normally hunted down a male to talk about art. Isn't it a bit more primal than that?" "Evidently not," said Squeak. "According to Seraphina, she's been hitting on all the ginger cats in Diamond Harbour. Megan thought that you and Seraphina, well, she didn't realise that Seraphina's your sister, and we think that she wanted to knock Seraphina out to get her out of the way, and then Megan met this ginger Tom she fancied, and yes, she told me she liked gingers. Anyway, he told her that you'd been neutered, and the rest is history," concluded Ron. "This is appalling," I said. I couldn't agree more," said Squeak. "Apparently she also took a photo of Seraphina asleep in that box surrounded by the empty gin bottles. I've heard a whisper that she might be using it to promote her own brand of artisanal gin." "Scheming as ever," mused Ron. "She'll be looking to use that to her advantage." The three of us all nodded and agreed that this was indeed appalling. "Imagine if she made a podcast about us," I said. "That could be rather embarrassing." And that was Scarface. It seems that what first appears to be admiration and even romance can sometimes turn out to be something rather more primal. Still, Weasley has come through the experience largely unscathed, and a little bit wiser about art, attraction, and the realities of life in a small harbour community, and perhaps most importantly, with a renewed sense of caution when it comes to taking things at face value. Although, what if his diary did end up as material for a podcast? That may prove to be the most troubling thought of all. Join Weasley next time for another entry from his diary, where observations of the world continue in ways that only he can interpret. Thanks for tuning in. If you're enjoying the podcast, please follow and leave a rating. Cheers.